Snow pressed against the cracked windows of the small apartment, muffling the distant sounds of cars passing along the main street of town. Inside, the air was cold enough that Ethan could see his own breath. He sat on a worn couch, knees drawn to his chest, and whispered into the silence, "Mum, I'm so hungry." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the ache in his stomach that had become too heavy to ignore. The words hung in the air like a plea no one else could hear. His mother, Sarah, froze in the kitchen. She had been staring at the cupboard for several minutes, pretending to search for something to cook, but there was nothing left. A few cans stacked like empty promises, some stale crackers, and a half-empty jar of peanut butter she had been stretching for days. She pressed her hand against her chest, her heart aching at her son's words. "Sweetheart," she said softly, forcing a smile as she turned toward him. "I'll figure something out soon, okay?" Ethan nodded, though his eyes betrayed doubt. He trusted her, but he was old enough to sense when hope was running thin. If you are touched by this story already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because here we share stories that remind us of the strength of love, resilience, and unexpected kindness. The apartment they lived in was small, just 2 rooms in an aging building on the edge of town. The paint peeled off the walls, the radiators rattled but barely warmed the space, and the landlord's last warning about unpaid rent was folded on the table. Sarah had tried to shield Ethan from the reality of their situation, but lately the cracks were too wide to hide. Sarah worked tirelessly, 2 part-time jobs that barely paid enough to cover essentials. In the mornings, she cleaned tables and refilled coffee cups at the diner on Main Street. In the evenings, she folded clothes at the laundromat across town, where the fluorescent lights buzzed endlessly and her feet burned from standing all day. She rarely rested, and yet the bills never seemed to shrink. Ethan, only 8, understood more than she wished he did. At school, he sat quietly, embarrassed when other kids opened colorful lunchboxes filled with sandwiches, fruit, and snacks. He pretended he wasn't hungry when he had nothing to eat. Teachers sometimes asked if he was okay, but Ethan always smiled and said yes. He didn't want anyone to worry, especially his mom. Tonight, however, his hunger could not be hidden. His small body shivered beneath a thin blanket. His words carried more than need. They carried the weight of a child realizing life was unfair. Sarah crouched beside him, brushing his messy brown hair from his forehead. "You know what, Ethan? When I was your age, my mom used to tell me that tough times never last forever. We'll get through this, you and me. I promise." "Really?" His voice cracked, caught between trust and doubt. "Really?" she said, though her heart screamed with uncertainty. The snow outside grew heavier, swallowing the town in silence. Through the thin walls, Sarah could hear laughter from neighbors celebrating early Christmas gatherings, music playing faintly, and the smell of baked goods drifting through the hallway. The contrast was almost unbearable. For a moment she wanted to collapse, to give up on pretending she had strength left, but then she looked into Ethan's tired eyes, and she found her reason to keep going. Ethan pulled his blanket tighter. "I wish we had cookies like the neighbors," he whispered. Sarah kissed the top of his head. "Someday we will. And not just cookies. We'll have a whole table full of food, you'll see." It wasn't just hunger pressing on their lives. It was the fear of what tomorrow might bring. The unpaid rent, the electricity bill, the empty fridge. They all formed a mountain that Sarah didn't know how to climb. Yet in the silence of their small apartment, she clung to the hope that something, anything, might change. Ethan closed his eyes, still whispering softly, "I'm so hungry, Mum." Sarah held him tighter, wishing she could silence not just his words, but the ache behind them. And outside, in the quiet of the snowy street, life was moving toward them in a way neither could expect. Morning broke with a pale light creeping through the blinds, painting the apartment in muted tones. Sarah's alarm clock buzzed harshly at 5:15 a.m., pulling her from a restless sleep. She silenced it quickly, not wanting to wake Ethan, who finally drifted off only after midnight. She stood quietly, watching him for a moment. His small frame curled under the blanket, reminded her why she pushed herself beyond exhaustion every single day. She dressed in the same diner uniform she had worn for years, the fabric faded, and the stitching pulling loose at the seams. Her sneakers, worn down from miles of walking back and forth, squeaked faintly as she stepped into the cold hallway. With a deep breath, she braced herself for another long day of chasing wages that always seemed to vanish before they arrived. The streets of their small town were already alive with the sounds of delivery trucks and commuters heading to offices she could never dream of working in. The diner sat on the corner of Main Street, a modest place where the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee lingered constantly. Sarah slipped behind the counter, tying her apron tight, and began pouring coffee for the first customers of the morning. "Morning, Sarah," said Rick, one of the regulars, barely glancing up from his newspaper. "Morning," she replied, with practiced cheer. She hid her fatigue behind polite smiles, though every muscle in her body screamed for rest. The tips she collected in the small jar by the register mattered more than anything else. Every dollar felt like a lifeline. Her shift passed in a blur of orders, dishes, and hurried movements. She didn't eat breakfast. She rarely did anymore, saving every bit of food at home for Ethan. By noon, her legs trembled, but she stayed focused. The thought of him sitting at school, maybe pretending he wasn't hungry, pushed her to keep moving. After finishing at the diner, she rushed across town to the laundromat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she sorted endless piles of clothes, the scent of detergent stinging her nose. She greeted customers, folded stacks of freshly dried laundry, and kept her head down. Many of them barely noticed her presence, as if she were invisible. During her short break, she sat on a plastic chair in the back room, rubbing her swollen ankles. She checked her phone, hoping for a message about a full-time opening somewhere, anywhere. But there was nothing. Bills cluttered her inbox, each one demanding what she didn't have. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Just hold on, Sarah, one more day." At home, things weighed heavier. The fridge was almost empty, and payday was still 3 long days away. She had stretched the groceries as far as she could, turning one meal into 3, but the shelves now looked bare. Ethan never complained, but she noticed how his eyes lingered on the kitchen counter, wishing for food that wasn't there. That evening, she tried to make something from what little remained. She spread the last of the peanut butter on stale bread and set it before Ethan as if it were a special treat. He forced a smile for her sake. "Thanks, Mom." "It's good." She swallowed hard, hiding the lump in her throat. "I'll get more groceries soon, I promise." Later, as she washed the single plate and knife they had used, she overheard Ethan humming softly to himself, pretending to be cheerful. She knew he was holding back, trying not to burden her with his hunger. That silent sacrifice tore at her more than anything else. The truth was undeniable. Sarah's strength was running thin. Every shift at the diner, every hour at the laundromat, every coin counted and stretched, yet still it wasn't enough. She worried not only about food, but about rent and the overdue utility bills threatening to darken their home. But quitting was never an option. For Ethan's sake, she would carry the weight of exhaustion, hunger, and despair on her shoulders. Somewhere deep inside, she clung to the hope that the tide might turn, even if she couldn't yet see how. And as the night settled once more over their fragile home, the gnawing reality of hunger pressed in stronger than ever, leaving Sarah to wonder how much longer she could keep her son's spirit safe. The school bus rattled along the cracked streets as Ethan stared out the window, clutching his backpack to his chest. He wore the same pair of sneakers he had been using for over a year. The soles were thin and the laces frayed, but he pulled them tighter as if that would make them last longer. Around him, other kids laughed, sharing snacks from their lunch bags. The scent of potato chips and peanut butter sandwiches made his stomach tighten painfully. When the bus stopped, Ethan walked quietly into the school building. The walls were lined with posters about kindness and community, but to him, those words felt far away. He kept his head down, hoping no one would notice the hole near the toe of his shoe, or the fact that his backpack sagged empty, with no lunch tucked inside. In the classroom, the teacher greeted everyone warmly. "Good morning, class. Today we're going to start with reading time." Ethan smiled faintly, glad for a distraction. Reading was one of the few things that carried him away from the hunger gnawing at his stomach. He opened his worn book, running his fingers over the creased pages, and let himself escape into the story for a few minutes. But when lunchtime came, reality hit harder. In the cafeteria, kids unpacked their meals, bright lunchboxes opening to reveal sandwiches, apple slices, chips, and juice boxes. Ethan sat at the far end of the table with nothing in front of him. He pulled out his book again, pretending he was too busy reading to eat. A boy across the table noticed. "You forgot your lunch again?" he asked, smirking. Ethan shook his head quickly. "I'm just not hungry." The boy shrugged and turned back to his food. A couple of other kids exchanged glances, whispering and giggling. Ethan kept his eyes glued to the page in front of him, his face hot with shame. He had grown used to hiding behind stories, pretending the emptiness inside him didn't matter. Still, not everyone ignored him. His teacher, Mrs. Parker, passed by the table and paused. She crouched beside him, her voice low. "Ethan, are you okay? You haven't been eating much lately." He forced a smile. "I'm fine, really. I had breakfast." Mrs. Parker studied him for a moment, concern softening her eyes, but she didn't press. "All right," she said gently. "But if you ever need anything, you can always talk to me." Ethan nodded, relieved when she moved on. He didn't want pity. What he wanted was simple, to see his mum smile without worry and to feel his stomach full at least once a day. Later, during recess, Ethan watched other kids run across the playground. He joined a game of tag, but his worn-out shoes slowed him down. His classmates shouted, "Come on, Ethan, run faster!" He tried, but he couldn't keep up. When he tripped and scraped his knee, the laughter stung worse than the pain. That night back at home, he pulled out a crumpled notebook from under his pillow. Inside, he had begun writing short notes he never showed anyone. One page read, "I'm hungry again, but Mum is trying. I don't want her to cry anymore." Another said, "Someday I'll buy her a big kitchen. It will have bread, milk, cookies, and everything she loves." He pressed his pencil to the page and wrote another line, "I'll be strong for her even when it hurts." Closing the notebook, he tucked it back under his pillow, a secret place where his hopes and struggles lived side by side. He whispered to himself, "One day things will be different." And with that quiet vow, he pulled his blanket close, holding on to the only thing he had left, his dreams of a better tomorrow. The evening air was sharp, the kind of cold that slipped through thin walls and reminded Sarah how fragile their shelter really was. She had spent the last of her energy warming up a can of soup that barely stretched between her and Ethan. Watching him scrape the bowl clean with a piece of bread, she knew it wasn't enough. His thin frame and tired eyes told the truth she had been trying to hide. Desperation pushed her to consider something she hated, asking for help. She thought of Mrs. Carter, the neighbor 2 doors down. Mrs. Carter always seemed well put together, her lawn neatly trimmed, her Christmas lights perfectly strung. Sarah hesitated, pride wrestling with necessity, but the memory of Ethan's whispered hunger the night before left her no choice. "I'll be back in a few minutes," Sarah told her son, brushing his hair gently. "Stay warm under the blanket, okay?" "Where are you going, Mum?" he asked, worry flickering in his voice. "Just to talk to a neighbor. Don't worry." She forced a smile, though her stomach knotted with unease. The hallway smelled faintly of someone else's baking, a rich scent of cinnamon rolls that made her mouth water. She straightened her coat, knocked on Mrs. Carter's door, and waited. After a moment, the door swung open. "Sarah?" Mrs. Carter said, surprised. "It's late." "I know, I'm sorry," Sarah replied quickly, her breath fogging in the cold air. I was wondering if you might have a little food to spare. Maybe some bread or milk. Ethan hasn't eaten much, and Mrs. Carter's expression hardened. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Sarah, you really should manage your money better. You can't just go around asking people for handouts. It's not a good example for your boy." The words cut deep. Sarah's cheeks burned, half from the chill, half from humiliation. "I'm not asking for much, just something to get us through until payday. He's hungry and you know, lots of families have it tough, but they find a way without bothering neighbors. You need to be more responsible." For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. She felt smaller than she ever had, standing under the weight of Mrs. Carter's judgment. Her hands trembled, not from cold but from shame. Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. "Mum, I'm so hungry." She lowered her eyes. "I understand. I'm sorry for asking." Mrs. Carter gave a quick nod, as if dismissing her, and closed the door without another word. Sarah stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the decorated wreath on her neighbor's door. Behind it, laughter floated from inside. Voices of family gathered around a table full of food. She turned back slowly, the sting of rejection heavy in her chest. When she returned, Ethan looked up from the couch. "Did she help us?" Sarah forced a smile she didn't feel. "Not this time, sweetheart." Ethan's face fell. "Maybe she didn't understand." "Maybe," Sarah said softly, tucking the blanket tighter around him. She wanted to protect him from the cruelty she had just faced, but she could see he already understood more than she wished he did. Later that night, as Sarah washed the soup bowl, the glow of Christmas lights blinked through their thin curtains from outside. She pictured the warm meals happening just steps away in other apartments. Roast chicken, casseroles, cookies stacked on plates, all unreachable as if they lived in another world. Her chest tightened with both anger and sadness. She had asked for so little, not for herself but for her child, and was met with coldness sharper than the winter air. The divide between her family and the others in this town had never felt greater. And yet, as Ethan drifted to sleep beside her, Sarah whispered, "We'll be okay." The words were fragile, almost breaking under the weight of her doubt, but she clung to them anyway. The night pressed heavy against the apartment, darker than usual. The streetlights outside flickered weakly, casting long shadows through the thin curtains. Inside, the silence was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, a hum that suddenly sputtered and died as the electricity cut off without warning. The room was swallowed in darkness. Sarah froze, her hands still damp from washing the single plate they had used for dinner. She stared at the blank microwave clock, her chest tightening. She had known this was coming. The last warning notice had been slipped under the door days ago. She had hoped for just a little more time, but the bill had gone unpaid too long. Ethan sat up on the couch, clutching his blanket. "Mom?" "Why did the lights go out?" Sarah forced calm into her voice. "It's just the power, honey. Sometimes it happens. We'll be okay." He pulled the blanket closer around his shoulders. The cold crept in almost instantly, sharper now that the heater had gone quiet. His small face turned toward her, pale in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I'm so hungry." The words pierced her like a blade. They weren't new, she had heard them before, but tonight they broke something inside her. She crossed the room quickly, wrapping her arms around him. "I know, baby, I know." Tears stung her eyes as she held him close. He was shivering, not just from the cold but from exhaustion and hunger that no blanket could soothe. She kissed the top of his head, her lips trembling against his messy hair. "I promise I'll fix this. I don't know how yet, but I will." Ethan's voice cracked. "You always say that, but it never changes." The honesty in his tone shattered her. She wanted to argue, to reassure him, but her throat closed around the truth. He was right. Nothing had changed. Despite every double shift, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, here they were. Darkness, cold, and empty cupboards. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her tears slipping silently down her face. "I'm so sorry." Ethan pressed his small hands against her arms, trying to comfort her even as his own stomach growled loudly in the quiet. "It's not your fault, Mom." The innocence of his words only deepened her pain. A child shouldn't have to comfort his mother. He should be laughing, playing, eating warm meals without worry. Instead, he was learning the weight of hunger and the ache of disappointment far too soon. Minutes dragged by. Sarah rocked him gently, humming a tune she remembered from her own childhood, though her voice wavered with emotion. She wished she could give him more than lullabies and promises. She wished she could give him certainty. The air in the apartment grew colder, the silence heavier. Sarah's mind raced. What could she do? There was no money left, No neighbor willing to help, no solution she could find in the middle of this endless night. Ethan's sobs grew louder, muffled against her chest. "Mom, I can't sleep. I'm too hungry." Her heart cracked under the sound. She pressed her cheek against his hair, whispering, "I know, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer." But even as she said it, her own body shook with fear. For the first time she felt she might not be able to carry them through this storm. Then, just as she thought the night could not get heavier, there was a sound, a firm knock at the door. Sarah froze, her arms tightening protectively around Ethan. No one ever came by this late. Her heart raced as the knock came again, steady and insistent, breaking through the silence of despair. She lifted her head, tears still on her cheeks, and whispered to herself, who could that be at this hour? The knock came again, firm and deliberate, echoing through the silent apartment. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. At this hour, visitors were unheard of. She tightened her hold on Ethan, who peeked nervously from beneath the blanket. "Mom, who is it?" he whispered. "I don't know," she answered softly, rising slowly to her feet. Fear and curiosity collided inside her. With hesitant steps, she moved toward the door, her fingers trembling as they brushed over the cold doorknob. She hesitated, listening for any sound beyond the thin wood barrier. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the faint crunch of snow under boots. Finally, she pulled the door open. A tall man stood there, his figure outlined by the glow of the streetlight. Snowflakes clung to his dark overcoat, and his expression was both stern and compassionate. His eyes scanned the dim interior before resting on Sarah and then the small boy clutching the blanket. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of both authority and kindness. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I couldn't ignore what I heard." Sarah blinked, confused. "What you heard?" He nodded slowly. "I was walking by on my way home when I heard your boy crying. He said he was hungry." His gaze softened as it shifted to Ethan. "No child should ever cry from hunger in this country." The words struck Sarah like a blow. Embarrassment rushed through her, burning her cheeks. She straightened her shoulders, defensive instinct rising. "We're fine," she said quickly, though the darkness of the apartment and the silence of her son betrayed her words. The man studied her for a moment, as if weighing her pride against her reality. "My name is Michael Donovan," he finally said. "I live across town. I don't usually stop like this, but—" His voice trailed off and he shook his head. "Something told me I had to." Ethan's eyes widened, curiosity replacing some of his fear. "You heard me?" he asked timidly. Michael crouched slightly, lowering himself to the boy's level. "Yes," he said gently. "And it broke my heart. No boy should have to go to bed hungry." Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't know whether to shut the door, thank him, or collapse from the weight of the moment. "We don't need pity," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm. Michael's expression grew serious. "I'm not here to pity you. I'm here because I know what hunger feels like. I know what it's like to hear your mother cry at night, thinking you're asleep. I've been where you are." Sarah froze, caught off guard by his words. Her defenses wavered as she searched his face. For a man who looked like he belonged to a different world, his eyes carried something raw and familiar. Pain remembered deeply. Ethan tilted his head, whispering to his mother, "He understands." Michael stood again, his presence filling the narrow doorway. "Please," he said, his tone both commanding and gentle. "Let me do something. At least for tonight. You don't have to accept anything beyond that, but let me help your son go to bed with a full stomach." Sarah's breath caught in her chest. Pride screamed for her to refuse, yet the weight of Ethan's hunger pressed harder than her pride ever could. She turned to her boy, whose pleading eyes said what his lips could not. "Mom," Ethan murmured, "please." The moment stretched, the cold air slipping into the apartment, wrapping around them. Sarah swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she whispered, "All right." "Just for tonight." Michael nodded once, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you, that's all I ask." For the first time in weeks, hope cracked through the darkness, carried by the presence of a stranger whose timing felt almost impossible. The snow crunched beneath their feet as Sarah, Ethan, and Michael walked down the quiet street toward the diner still open on the corner. Sarah clutched her thin coat tighter around herself, each step heavy with doubt. What was she doing, following a stranger into the night? Yet, when she glanced at Ethan, his face lit with anticipation, she knew she couldn't turn back. Michael walked ahead slightly, his long strides confident, but he slowed whenever Ethan lagged behind. He seemed patient, aware of their hesitation. When they reached the diner, the warmth inside hit them instantly. The smell of burgers sizzling on the grill and the sharp scent of hot coffee made Ethan's stomach growl audibly. He ducked his head, embarrassed, but Michael smiled down at him. "That's the best sound I've heard all day," he said. They slid into a booth near the window. Ethan pressed his hands against the table, eyes darting to the menu. Sarah shifted uneasily in her seat, her pride tugging at her again. "This isn't necessary," she murmured to Michael. "We'll be fine." Michael met her gaze firmly. "Sarah, sometimes letting someone help is the strongest thing you can do. Tonight let your son eat without worry." Her lips parted to argue, but Ethan's eager whisper stopped her. "Mom, can I get a burger, please?" Her heart clenched. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Michael ordered for them, a cheeseburger and fries for Ethan, soup and a sandwich for Sarah, coffee for himself. When the waitress set the food down, Ethan's eyes widened as if a feast had been laid before him. He picked up the burger with both hands and took a bite so big he could barely chew. His cheeks puffed out, his eyes closed in delight. "This is the best thing I've ever tasted," he mumbled through his mouthful, then caught his mother's stern look. "Sorry, Mom," he added quickly, swallowing. Sarah's eyes stung with tears. She tried to blink away. She picked at her sandwich, appetite dulled by emotion. She hadn't seen Ethan this happy in months. Michael leaned back, watching quietly. "You remind me of myself," he said to Ethan. "When I was your age, my mom worked long hours just like yours. I remember the nights we went to bed with nothing but water. The first hot meal someone bought for us felt like the world had changed." Ethan looked up, curious. "Someone bought you food too?" Michael nodded. "Yes, and I never forgot it." Sarah's eyes flickered with surprise. "I didn't expect someone like you to understand." "Someone like me?" Michael asked, his brow lifting slightly. "You look like you have everything. A nice coat, a steady voice. Like you've never had to worry about a meal." Michael's expression softened. "Looks can be deceiving. I know exactly how it feels to struggle. That's why I couldn't just walk past your door tonight." For the first time, Sarah's guard lowered a little. His words carried sincerity she couldn't deny. Ethan, already halfway through his fries, piped up, "Does that mean we're kind of the same?" Michael smiled warmly. "Yes, Ethan, in many ways we are." The boy beamed at the answer, then shoved another fry into his mouth, grinning. As they ate, the atmosphere shifted. Sarah still carried unease, but gratitude seeped through her defenses. Watching her son eat with unrestrained joy was a gift she hadn't expected to receive. For a moment, the weight of bills, judgmental neighbors, and sleepless nights faded. When Ethan finally slowed, yawning with a full stomach, Sarah glanced at Michael, her voice quiet. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." Michael shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just remember this night when you see someone else in need." Sarah held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. She didn't know where this unexpected kindness might lead, but she sensed it was only the beginning. The diner had thinned out, the clatter of plates and voices fading into a quieter rhythm. A waitress wiped down tables near the counter, humming softly, while the warm glow from the hanging lights wrapped the booth where Sarah, Ethan, and Michael sat. Ethan leaned against his mother's side, his stomach finally full, his eyelids heavy, but his smile still lingering. Sarah brushed his hair gently, her heart caught between gratitude and disbelief. Michael sipped his coffee, his gaze distant as though he were seeing something beyond the diner's walls. Finally he spoke, his tone softer than before. You know, Sarah, when I said I've been where you are, I meant it more than you realize. Sarah tilted her head, cautious. What do you mean? He set his cup down slowly, his hand steady yet deliberate. I grew up in a neighborhood not far from here. My mom raised me alone after my father walked out. She worked herself to the bone, much like you do. There were nights when she came home with blistered feet and eyes so tired she could barely keep them open. And still we went hungry more often than I'd like to remember. Sarah blinked, the image colliding with the man sitting before her. You? She asked, disbelief lacing her voice. But you, look at you. You seem like someone who's always had everything. Michael gave a faint, almost bitter smile. I had nothing but her love and hunger. Hunger was constant. I'll never forget the sound of my stomach growling in the silence of our apartment. I used to pretend I wasn't hungry so she wouldn't feel guilty, but she always knew. Ethan stirred, listening. His small voice cut through the quiet. That's like me and Mom. Michael turned to him, his expression softening. Exactly like you, Ethan. I see myself in you more than you realize. Sarah's throat tightened. So what changed? How did you go from that to... She gestured faintly at his clean coat, his calm demeanor, the quiet confidence he carried. Michael leaned back, his gaze steady. Hard work, yes, but also people who cared. Strangers, teachers, neighbors. Once in a while someone stepped in when we needed it most. They didn't fix everything, but their kindness gave us the strength to keep moving. One man in particular bought us groceries when I was your son's age. That night changed me. It showed me that even when the world feels cruel, kindness can break through. His voice grew quieter, heavy with memory. I promised myself that if I ever had enough, I'd do the same for others. And here I am keeping that promise. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. She turned away, trying to hide them, but her voice betrayed her. I don't even know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Michael replied. I know what it feels like to sit where you're sitting now, and I know how hard it is to accept help without feeling ashamed. But listen to me, Sarah, you are not failing, you are surviving. And that takes more strength than most people can even imagine. Ethan looked up at his mother, his small hand reaching for hers. Mom, he understands, just like us. Sarah squeezed his fingers, her chest aching. She had never expected to find kinship in a man like this. Yet his words stirred something inside her, a fragile hope she thought she had lost. Michael leaned forward slightly, his eyes intent. Tonight isn't about me giving and you taking. It's about remembering that we're not alone. Pain isolates us, makes us think we're invisible, but we're not. Not if we reach out. Sarah breathed in slowly, letting his words settle. For the first time in what felt like years, the burden on her shoulders seemed just a little lighter. And as Ethan drifted into a peaceful doze beside her, Sarah realized this night was no longer just about hunger. It was about connection, two pasts colliding to create a fragile spark of hope for the future. The hum of the diner faded as the night deepened, leaving their booth in a hush broken only by Ethan's soft breathing. He had fallen asleep against Sarah's arm, his small body curled like he finally felt safe. Sarah stroked his hair absently, her mind caught in a storm of emotions. Gratitude tugged at her heart, but so did unease. She didn't know what Michael wanted in return for all this. Michael noticed her silence. He set his coffee cup down and spoke carefully. I know this feels strange. You don't know me and suddenly I'm here buying you dinner, but I don't want tonight to be the end of it. Sarah stiffened. What do you mean? I want to help more than just this one meal, he said, his voice steady. Groceries, rent, school supplies for Ethan. Things that would ease the weight you're carrying. You've been fighting alone for too long. Sarah's chest tightened. The offer sounded like a lifeline, yet it scared her. She shook her head. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. And nothing in this world comes without strings. Michael's expression remained calm, though a flicker of sadness crossed his eyes. There are no strings, Sarah. I'm offering because I remember what it's like. Because someone once helped me, and I promised I'd do the same when I could. She leaned back, crossing her arms as if to shield herself. People always say that. And then later, they expect something in return. I won't put myself or Ethan in that position. Michael nodded slowly, acknowledging her fear. You're right to be cautious. The world isn't kind, but I'm not here to take anything from you. The only thing I'd ever ask is that when you find your footing again, you do for someone else what I'm trying to do for you now. His words hung in the air, gentle yet firm. Sarah looked down at Ethan, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. The thought of him having enough food, a warm home and supplies for school pulled at her heart. But the idea of accepting help from a stranger clashed with the pride that had carried her this far. I don't know, she whispered, her voice raw. What if this is a mistake? Michael leaned forward, lowering his tone. Sarah, the mistake would be letting your pride keep Ethan hungry. I don't say that to shame you. I say it because I know the burden you're carrying. You're strong, stronger than most, but even the strongest people need help sometimes. Her eyes stung. You make it sound so easy. It isn't easy, he admitted. It's the hardest thing in the world, letting someone in. But look at your son. Tonight he ate without pain. He's sleeping without hunger gnawing at him. That's not weakness, that's love. You gave him that by saying yes tonight. All I'm asking is for you to consider letting me help again tomorrow. Sarah studied him, searching for cracks in his words, any sign of deception, but all she saw was sincerity, reflected in eyes that carried their own history of struggle. Ethan stirred in his sleep, murmuring, "Thank you, Mom," before drifting off again. The innocence of the words pierced her heart. He believed she could keep him safe. Could she risk turning away the only chance she had to make that true? Her voice came out shaky, hesitant, but honest. "I'll think about it." Michael nodded, not pushing further. "That's all I ask. Think about it. And know that whatever you decide, tonight showed me you and Ethan deserve more than the world has given you." For the first time, Sarah felt the walls around her pride beginning to crack, not broken yet, but bending under the weight of hope. The morning after the diner visit, Sarah woke with a strange sensation in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't peace exactly, but the heaviness of despair had lifted just slightly. Ethan stirred beside her, stretching with a smile. "Mom, I dreamed we had pancakes," he said. She smoothed his hair, her throat tightening. "Maybe one day soon," she replied. When she opened the apartment door to fetch the newspaper, she froze. A paper bag sat on the mat filled with groceries, milk, bread, eggs, and even a small box of cereal. A note was tucked inside. "For you and your son. No one should go hungry." Her hands shook as she lifted it. She glanced up and down the hallway, but no one was there. "Mom?" Ethan asked, appearing behind her. His eyes widened at the sight of the bag. "Where did that come from?" Sarah swallowed hard. I don't know, but it's for us." Ethan clapped his hands together. "We can have real breakfast." As they cooked scrambled eggs together, the aroma filled the apartment, warm and comforting. Sarah blinked back tears as she watched Ethan devour his plate with joy. But in the back of her mind, questions stirred. Who had left the bag? Michael, or someone else who had heard about them? Later that day, Michael called. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an undercurrent of purpose. "I may have mentioned your situation to a few trusted people," he admitted. "I hope that's all right." Sarah's breath caught. "You told people about us?" "I didn't give details," he said quickly. "I just said a neighbor needed some support. People want to help more than you think. They just need someone to show them how." She hesitated, conflicted. Pride bristled again, but she couldn't ignore Ethan's full stomach or the kindness of whoever had left the groceries. "I don't know how to feel about that," she admitted. "I understand," Michael replied, "but look at the effect already. One act of kindness can spark another. You'll see." That evening, when Sarah returned from work, another surprise awaited her. A small box sat outside their door, filled with school supplies, pencils, notebooks, crayons. A simple card inside read, "For Ethan to keep dreaming." Ethan's face lit up as he rifled through the box. "Mom, look!" Now I don't have to borrow from the teacher anymore. He hugged the notebooks to his chest like treasures. Sarah sat down heavily on the couch, overcome. The weight of judgment from neighbors like Mrs. Carter still lingered, but now another truth emerged. Compassion lived here too, hidden but real. The days that followed brought more quiet gestures. A bag of fruit one morning. A pair of winter boots left in a box the next. Sarah never saw who left them, but Ethan called it their secret angels. One evening, as she carried the latest bundle inside, a neighbor across the hall, Mr. Jenkins, spoke up. "Sarah," he said gently, "we should have noticed sooner. I'm sorry. No one in this building should feel alone." Her throat tightened as she whispered, "Thank you." The ripple had begun. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not pitied, but cared for. And Ethan, once weighed down by shame, now walked into school with a spark in his eyes, clutching his new supplies proudly. That night, as he scribbled in his notebook, he looked up at her. "Mom, it feels like people finally hear us." Sarah brushed away tears, her voice steady. "Yes, Ethan, they do." What had started with one man at their door was growing into something bigger, something that felt like hope taking root in their lives. The following week brought a shift Sarah hadn't anticipated. For months, every day had been a cycle of exhaustion, working double shifts, coming home drained, worrying through the night. But now, with the community quietly supporting her and Ethan, she began to breathe a little easier. Still, she knew handouts wouldn't last forever. She needed something more stable. One evening, Michael called her. His tone was warm but purposeful. "Sarah, I know you're tired of scraping by. There's a position opening at one of my company's offices. Administrative work. Steady hours. Better pay. Would you be willing to try?" Sarah's breath caught. "Me? In an office?" "Why not you?" Michael replied simply. "You've been managing 2 jobs, keeping a household afloat, raising your son. That takes more organization and endurance than most office workers ever face. You just need a chance." She hesitated, fear twisting in her chest. "But I've never worked in an office. I don't even own the kind of clothes people wear there." Michael chuckled softly. "Skills can be learned. Confidence can grow. And as for clothes, let me handle that part. What matters is your determination, and you've proven you have plenty of that." The next morning, Sarah stood before the mirror in a second-hand blouse Michael had arranged for her. She barely recognized herself. Ethan beamed from the couch. "Mom, you look like a boss." Her cheeks flushed, a mix of pride and disbelief. "You think so?" "Definitely. They're gonna love you." With Ethan's encouragement, she walked into the office that afternoon, nerves buzzing through her body. The building was sleek, so different from the diner or laundromat. She wanted to turn around, but Michael's words echoed in her mind. "You just need a chance." The supervisor, Ms. Reynolds, greeted her with a polite but skeptical smile. "So, you're Sarah?" "Michael spoke highly of you. We'll start with basic tasks. Filing, scheduling, data entry. Can you handle that?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I'll do my best." The first days were overwhelming. She stumbled over the computer programs, fumbled with the phone system, and blushed every time she had to ask a question. At night, she came home frustrated, whispering to herself, "Maybe I don't belong here." But Ethan refused to let her quit. "Mum, you always tell me to keep trying, even when it's hard. This is your turn." His words reignited her resolve. Each morning, she walked into the office straighter, determined to learn. Slowly, the tasks became familiar. Her hands moved more confidently over the keyboard, her voice steadier on the phone. Ms. Reynolds began to notice. "You're improving quickly," the supervisor said one afternoon. "I wasn't sure at first, but you're proving me wrong. Keep this up." Sarah walked home that evening with her head held high. For the first time in years, she felt capable of more than just surviving. She was building something, a future not just for herself but for Ethan. One night, Ethan worked on his homework at the kitchen table while Sarah reviewed spreadsheets she had brought home to practice. He looked up, smiling. "Mom, you're like a real office lady now." She laughed softly, touched by his pride. "I guess I am." The electricity hummed steadily, the fridge stocked with groceries, the apartment warmer than it had been in months. The shadow of despair still lingered, but it no longer defined them. Sarah realized she was changing. Not because someone rescued her, but because someone believed in her enough to give her a chance. And with every passing day, she was beginning to believe in herself too. The shift in Sarah's life rippled quickly into Ethan's world. With his mother steadier at work and food no longer scarce, he began walking into school with his head held higher. His torn shoes had been replaced by a new pair, nothing flashy, just sturdy sneakers that fit without pinching his toes. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't carrying a secret shame around with him. In the cafeteria, Ethan no longer sat empty-handed at the edge of the table. He opened his lunch bag and pulled out a sandwich, an apple, and a juice box. The boy across from him raised an eyebrow. "Hey, you actually brought food today." Ethan shrugged, a shy grin tugging at his lips. "Yeah. My mom got a new job." Something about saying those words out loud filled him with pride. He took a bite of his sandwich, savoring not just the taste but the freedom of no longer pretending he wasn't hungry. The whispers that once stung his ears faded, replaced by curiosity and even respect. At recess, he joined the game of soccer more confidently. His new shoes gripped the ground better, his legs moving faster. When he scored a goal, the kids cheered instead of laughing at him. For the first time, Ethan felt like he belonged. That evening, he burst into their apartment with excitement. "Mom, I scored at recess today, and I wasn't the slowest one anymore." Sarah looked up from her papers, her face lighting with pride. "That's wonderful, Ethan. I'm so proud of you." He dropped his backpack and wrapped his arms around her waist. "It's all because of you." She kissed the top of his head, her eyes glistening. "No, sweetheart, it's because of you. You never gave up." Beyond school, Ethan's confidence grew in quieter ways. He began raising his hand in class, offering answers instead of shrinking into silence. When his teacher praised him for his effort, he blushed but didn't hide. At night, he worked diligently on his homework, scribbling numbers and words with determination. Michael, true to his word, didn't fade from their lives. On weekends, he sometimes picked Ethan up for small outings, a trip to the park, fishing by the river, or tutoring sessions at the library. Ethan soaked up every lesson, not just about reading or math, but about perseverance. "Success isn't about never falling," Michael told him one afternoon as they sat on a bench. "It's about getting up every time you do." Ethan nodded, repeating the words softly to himself, as if engraving them in his heart. One Saturday, Michael handed him a small notebook. "This is for you. Write down your dreams, your goals, anything that matters. Don't ever stop dreaming, Ethan." The boy traced the cover with his fingers, then opened it carefully. On the first page, he wrote in uneven letters, "One day I'll buy Mom a house with a big kitchen." When he showed it to Sarah that night, she pressed the notebook to her chest. "You're going to do amazing things, Ethan." "Because of you," he said firmly. "No," she whispered, smiling through tears, "because of you." The transformation wasn't just visible in Ethan's brighter smile or steadier steps. It was in the way he began to see the world. Hunger no longer defined him. Fear no longer silenced him. He carried hope now, and hope changed everything. As he drifted to sleep that night, notebook tucked under his pillow, he whispered to himself, "I'm not the same anymore." And deep down, he knew it was true. The steady rhythm of Sarah's new life was beginning to take shape. She walked to the office each morning with her head higher than before, greeted by co-workers who had started to see her as more than just the woman Michael helped. Ethan thrived at school, and their evenings were no longer spent in darkness and hunger, but in warmth and laughter. Yet whispers crept in, as they always do when kindness meets envy. One afternoon, while Sarah sorted files at her desk, she overheard two employees whispering near the break room. "She only got the job because of him," one muttered. "Exactly," the other replied. "Michael's just doing her favors. I bet she's milking it." The words stung. Sarah froze, her hands tightening around the papers. She fought the urge to confront them, instead slipping back to her work, her chest heavy. That evening, as she walked home with Ethan skipping at her side, she couldn't shake the voices from her mind. At dinner, she picked at her food, quieter than usual. "Mom," Ethan asked, frowning, "what's wrong?" She forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a long day." But Ethan wasn't convinced. Later, while he scribbled in his notebook, he glanced up and said softly, "People might not understand, but I do. You work really hard. Don't forget that." His words soothed her, but the doubts lingered. The following week, the whispers grew louder. A neighbor muttered as she passed in the hallway. "Funny how some people suddenly get everything handed to them." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she walked on without replying. By Friday, the weight became unbearable. She met Michael for coffee and finally let her guard down. "People are talking," she admitted, her voice trembling. "They think I'm using you, that I don't deserve any of this." Michael leaned forward, his tone firm but calm. "Sarah, listen to me. You've earned everything you have. I opened a door, yes, but you walked through it. You're the one doing the work. Don't let anyone take that from you." Tears welled in her eyes. "But what if they're right? What if I wouldn't be here without you?" He shook his head. "Needing help doesn't erase your worth. Do you think I built my life alone? I didn't. And neither should you. Don't let pride or gossip rewrite your story." Sarah swallowed hard, nodding slowly. His words steadied her, but the fear of judgment still lingered like a shadow. The true test came the next week, when a local paper published a small feature about Michael's community work. The article mentioned her by name, painting her as an example of someone whose life had been turned around by his generosity. At the office, glances followed her. Some co-workers congratulated her politely, but others eyed her with thinly veiled resentment. That evening she broke down at home, the article spread out on the table. Ethan climbed onto the chair beside her, his hand resting on hers. "Mom, you're not alone anymore, remember? You told me that when I was scared." His steady gaze anchored her. She realized he was right. The next day she walked into the office with a new resolve. When a co-worker made a sly remark, she met their eyes and said firmly, "I work hard every day to be here just like you. Judge me on that, not on what you think you know." The room went silent. That evening, Michael stopped by their apartment. "I heard about the article," he said carefully. "How are you holding up?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It hurt, but I'm stronger now. They can say what they want. I know the truth. And Ethan reminded me of that." Michael smiled faintly. "He's a wise boy." "Yes," Sarah said, her voice steady. "And I'm learning to be strong enough to deserve him." The test of trust had been painful, but it left her with something unshakable, a renewed faith in herself. The weeks passed, and Sarah's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The whispers at work faded, though she still felt the weight of judgment now and then. But she had learned to rise above it. Her job at the office grew more secure, and Ethan continued to thrive at school. He was no longer the quiet, shy boy who ate alone. He had friends now, real ones, who invited him to birthday parties and school events. One evening, as Sarah was leaving the office, she spotted a flyer on the community bulletin board. "Help needed. Food drive for local families in need." The words seemed to leap off the paper, their meaning clear. She had been on the receiving end of kindness for so long. It was time to give back. She hurried home and shared the idea with Ethan. "How about we volunteer for the food drive? We can help pack boxes, deliver food to families in need, just like someone did for us." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Can we bring some of our snacks to share?" "Of course," Sarah said, smiling. "We'll bring what we can." Over the next few days, they collected non-perishable food, toys, and clothes to donate. On the day of the food drive, they showed up early, ready to help. Sarah had no idea how rewarding it would feel to pack boxes for others, each one a reminder of the days when she couldn't provide even the basics for her son. As she worked, she was joined by others, neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who had heard about the event. Michael was there too, overseeing the organization, but Sarah was determined to stand on her own this time, without his support. At the end of the day, as the boxes were loaded onto the truck for delivery, One of the volunteers approached Sarah. "You know, I've seen you around here. I remember when you and your son moved into this building. You've come a long way." Sarah blinked, surprised. "I didn't realize anyone noticed." "People notice when change happens," the volunteer said, a smile playing at her lips. "And it's always for the better when it comes from the heart." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't thought much about how far she'd come until that moment. It wasn't just the groceries, the new job, or the support from Michael. It was everything, the way the community had wrapped its arms around her, giving her the strength to stand tall. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, looking at the empty boxes they had packed, the ones they had delivered to families just like hers had been. The small, simple acts of kindness felt like seeds being planted. She knew that in time they would grow into something even bigger. She took a deep breath, her heart full, and whispered to herself, "One day I'll do this for someone else. I'll give back the way I was given to." The journey hadn't been easy. It never would be. But the road ahead now felt brighter, and the path forward was lined with the possibility of something greater than survival, something that felt like a promise. As she stood and turned off the lights, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living and giving, and that was enough. The following months felt different. Sarah no longer moved through her days in a haze of exhaustion and fear. She woke up with a sense of purpose, and each step she took felt more solid than the last. Ethan's laughter had become a permanent fixture in their apartment, and the shadows of hunger that once clung to them seemed to fade. There were still challenges, still bills to pay, and still moments when she doubted if she was doing enough. But those moments were fewer, and they no longer defined her. She stood at the kitchen counter one evening, cooking dinner, when Ethan burst into the room, holding up a flyer for a local school event. "Mom, can I go to the science fair this year? I want to show them my project on space." His excitement was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah saw his unrestrained joy. "Of course you can," she said, smiling. "You can do anything, Ethan." It wasn't just a promise, it was a reflection of the truth they had built together. She had spent so many years trying to protect him from the world's cruelty, from hunger and fear. But now she realized it wasn't just about survival. It was about living. And not just living, but thriving. As she tucked Ethan into bed that night, she kissed him on the forehead. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," she whispered. "You've taught me more than anyone ever could." Ethan, half asleep, mumbled, "I'm proud of you too, Mum. We're a team." Her chest swelled with emotion. There was no greater reward than hearing those words from him, seeing how far they had come together. And it wasn't just Ethan, it was the entire community that had rallied around them. It was Michael, who had offered more than just a helping hand. He had given them hope when they thought there was none left. It was the neighbors who left food on their doorstep, the teacher who had offered extra tutoring when Ethan needed it most, and the strangers who had quietly supported them without ever asking for anything in return. It had taken a village, not to save them, but to show them how to save themselves, to give them the strength to believe they were worth more than just the sum of their struggles. One morning, as Sarah walked Ethan to school, he skipped ahead of her, his small frame full of energy and confidence. He was no longer the boy who hid his hunger behind a smile. He was becoming the person he was meant to be, and so was she. It was a simple moment, but it marked the beginning of something new for both of them. She had started the journey believing she was weak, but now she understood her true strength. She had learned that strength wasn't about doing everything on her own. It was about knowing when to accept help and when to offer it to others. It was about creating a circle of kindness that could never be broken. The road ahead wasn't perfect, but that was the beauty of it. They were moving forward, together, as a family, as a team. And Sarah knew, no matter what came next, they would face it with the same strength they had discovered in each other. As she watched Ethan disappear into the schoolyard, she felt a smile spread across her face. There was no greater gift than this, to know that the worst was behind them, and the best was yet to come.